Long before marble temples, conquering legions, and the roar of crowds in the Colosseum, there was only wilderness. Italy was not yet a country, just a land of scattered tribes, dense forests, and untamed hills. And in the central part of this land, nestled between 7 rugged hills and the winding Tiber River, a legend was born. They say the gods watched closely that day. It began with 2 abandoned infants, left to die in a basket drifting down the river. Their names, Romulus and Remus. Their mother was a priestess, punished for breaking her vows. Their father, some claimed it was the god Mars himself. The river carried the twins to the foot of the Palatine Hill, where they were discovered by a she-wolf. Not a woman, not a symbol, a literal beast, snarling and maternal. She nursed them in a cave called the Lupercal, keeping them alive when all of nature seemed poised to let them die. Eventually, a shepherd found the boys and raised them as his own. They grew into wild, fearless men, leaders of outcasts, bandits, and wanderers. And when the time came to build a city, they argued. Romulus wanted the Palatine Hill. Remus preferred the Aventine. So they looked to the skies. They waited for omens. When Romulus saw more vultures, he claimed divine favor. Remus laughed and leapt over the walls Romulus had begun to build. It was a fatal mistake. Romulus struck him down, his own brother, on the very ground that would become Rome. So perish anyone who crosses my walls, he is said to have declared. And so it began. Rome was not born in nobility. It was a city of exiles, criminals, runaways, a refuge for men with nothing left to lose. They had no women, so they staged a festival, invited the neighboring Sabines, and during the celebration, abducted their daughters. It was a crude, violent act, but one that forged the first Roman families. Even from the beginning, Rome would take what it needed, then justify it as destiny. As the years passed, huts of mud became houses of stone, marshes were drained, roads were carved, walls were built. The city grew, not because of wealth or peace, but through unyielding will. The early kings ruled with a mix of fear and reverence. Some brought order, others brought war. But eventually, the Romans grew tired of monarchy and overthrew their last king, Tarquinius Superbus, a tyrant hated for his cruelty. That rebellion in 509 BCEE gave birth to the Roman Republic, a system where no man would rule alone, where power would be divided, balanced, controlled, or so they hoped. But even in these early days, one thing was clear. Rome was different. It didn't just want to survive, it wanted to dominate, not just to exist, but to expand. They believed they were chosen, favored, destined for greatness. And from the blood of a brother, from the milk of a wolf, from a crime and a myth, an empire was already stirring beneath the dust. After centuries of kings, some just, others cruel, the Romans had had enough. In 509 BCE, they cast out their last monarch, Tarquinius Superbus, a man whose reign ended not with grace, but with a rape, a revolt, and a rebirth. According to legend, His son, Sextus Tarquinius, violated Lucretia, a noblewoman known for her virtue. Shamed and devastated, she took her own life. Her death sparked outrage. It was the final straw. The people rose. The Tarquins were driven from Rome, and in their place, the Romans built something new, something bold. A system where no single man would ever hold absolute power again. The Roman Republic was born. At its heart was the Senate, a body of elders who claimed to represent Rome's wisdom and tradition. Alongside them were two consuls, elected annually. They would share command, veto each other, and most importantly, step down after 1 year. It was brilliant in design, a government of checks and balances, of shared duty and civil service. But it was far from equal. Rome was sharply divided. On one side were the patricians, wealthy aristocrats who claimed descent from the city's founding families. On the other, the plebeians, everyone else, farmers, artisans, merchants, soldiers. They paid taxes, fought in wars, bled for Rome, yet they had little say in how it was governed. Tensions simmered, and so began the struggle of the orders, a centuries-long battle between the classes. Through peaceful protests, walkouts, and even the threat of leaving the city en masse, the plebeians slowly gained ground. They won the right to elect tribunes, officials who could veto Senate decisions. They demanded laws be written down, resulting in the 12 Tables, the first Roman code of law. Eventually, plebeians could even hold the consulship itself. The Republic adapted, but never truly equalized. As Rome's political structure evolved, so did its ambitions. The Republic fought to control Latium, then Italy, then Sicily, and beyond. But it wasn't until Rome faced a true rival that its destiny was tested. That rival was Carthage. In a series of brutal conflicts known as the Punic Wars, Rome battled this powerful North African city-state for dominance of the Mediterranean. The Second War was the most terrifying. Hannibal, a Carthaginian general of genius and fury, crossed the Alps with war elephants and an army hardened by years of training. He destroyed Roman legions in battle after battle, Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, where over 50,000 Romans died in a single day. Rome staggered, but it did not fall. Rather than surrender, it adapted. It avoided open battle. It wore Hannibal down. And under Scipio Africanus, Rome brought the war to Carthage itself, defeating Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. Carthage was broken. Rome stood supreme. Victory brought more than pride. It brought wealth from plundered cities, new provinces, and foreign tribute. It brought slaves by the tens of thousands. It brought land, vast estates taken by the elite. And it brought decay, because with wealth came corruption. Senators bought elections, generals bribed soldiers. The poor were driven from their farms, replaced by slave labor. The divide between rich and poor grew into a chasm, and at the center of this storm stood the Republic itself, still noble in word, but crumbling in spirit. Rome had won the world, but in doing so, It had begun to lose itself. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic had become a paradox. Outwardly, it was stronger than ever, its borders expanding, its cities rich, its armies feared. But within, the system that had once balanced ambition with duty was breaking apart. And at the heart of this unraveling stood Gaius Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BCE into the prestigious Julian clan, Caesar was a man of lineage, but not of immediate wealth. He had to build his name through cleverness, charisma, and unshakable ambition. He aligned himself with the popularis faction, those who claimed to speak for the people rather than the elite senate. He knew how to command a crowd, he knew how to flatter, and above all, he knew how to wait. Caesar's path to power truly began when he formed the first triumvirate, an unofficial alliance with two powerful men, Crassus, the richest man in Rome, Pompey, Rome's most celebrated general. With their backing, Caesar became consul in 59 BCE. Then, as his term ended, he secured a governorship in Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium. What followed was one of the greatest military campaigns in history. Over nearly a decade, Caesar conquered Gaul, defeating dozens of tribes and expanding Rome's borders to the Atlantic. His dispatches, Commentari de Bello Gallico, were sent back to Rome and read aloud to the public, painting him as a hero, a savior, a conqueror. His legions adored him. He became more than a general. He became a legend. But legends threatened those in power. The Senate grew uneasy. Pompey, once his ally, now saw Caesar as a rival. In 49 BCE, the Senate, under Pompey's influence, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. He stood on the banks of the Rubicon River, the border between his province and Italy. To cross it with his army would be treason. Caesar paused and then marched forward. Alea iacta est, he said. The die is cast. It was civil war. Caesar moved swiftly. Pompey fled to Greece. Caesar followed, defeating him at Pharsalus. Pompey fled again, this time to Egypt, where he was betrayed and murdered. When Caesar arrived, he was handed Pompey's severed head as a gift. But instead of celebrating, he wept. He had not wanted Pompey's death. He had wanted his surrender. He remained in Egypt for months, entangled in politics and passion with Cleopatra, the young queen who would bear him a son. Returning to Rome, Caesar was now unchallenged. He took the title of dictator, first for 10 years, then for life. He reformed the calendar, creating what we now call the Julian calendar. He relieved debts, built temples, gave land to veterans. To the people, he was generous. To the Senate, he was dangerous. Too much power, too much popularity, too little republic. On March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, a group of senators, including his trusted friend Brutus, lured Caesar to the Senate house. There, they surrounded him. They stabbed him 23 times. He collapsed beneath the statue of Pompey, his former ally, rival, and ghost of the Republic. His final words, as legend has it, "Et tu, brute? Even you?" The assassins believed they had saved the Republic. Instead, they doomed it. The people mourned, rioted, power vacuums formed. The Republic had no idea how to function without Caesar, and into that chaos would rise a new force, one that would wear Caesar's name and take his place on a throne that Rome had sworn would never exist. In the wake of Julius Caesar's assassination, Rome did not return to peace. It plunged into more civil war, bloody, bitter, and personal. The killers of Caesar believed they were restoring liberty, but they had only created a power vacuum. Into that chaos stepped a young man, barely 20, Gaius Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew and his adopted son. He was quiet, pale, studious. No one expected much, but they underestimated him. Octavian was ruthless beneath the surface. He formed the Second Triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus, dividing the empire among themselves. Together, they hunted Caesar's assassins, defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. But unity never lasts in Rome. Lepidus faded, and Antony, drawn to Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, became a liability. Octavian turned the Senate against him, framing Antony as a traitor who had forsaken Rome for the East. The final showdown came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian's fleet crushed Antony and Cleopatra. They fled and died by their own hands. Octavian returned to Rome, not as a warlord, but as a savior. In 27 BCE, he claimed to restore the Republic, handing powers back to the Senate, but it was a performance. They rewarded him with the title Augustus, the Revered One. He became princeps, first citizen, not a king, but far more powerful than any king before him. He controlled the military, the treasury, the laws. Rome was now an empire in everything but name. And so began the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, 2 centuries of relative stability and prosperity. Augustus rebuilt the city in marble, reformed the laws, standardized currency and roads. He turned a crumbling republic into a machine, one of order, loyalty, and silent obedience. When he died in 14 CE, he was deified, a god among mortals. And the Senate, once guardians of liberty, now served emperors. The Republic was gone, but Rome had never seemed stronger. The Pax Romana brought roads, aqueducts, monuments, but peace in Rome was always fragile. Behind the marble and order, the cracks had already begun to spread. By the 2nd century CE, the empire stretched from Britain to Babylon. It was too large, too diverse, too dependent on loyalty to one man. And after Augustus, not every emperor was worthy of that loyalty. Some were wise: Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. But others? Caligula, a madman who declared war on the sea and tried to make his horse a senator. Nero, who watched Rome burn while playing music, then blamed the Christians. These men ruled like gods, untouchable, but they left chaos in their wake. The Senate had no real power. The people had no voice. The legions, once defenders of the state, became kingmakers. They murdered emperors, installed generals, took bribes for loyalty. In just 1 year, the year of the 5 emperors, Rome saw emperor after emperor rise and fall, some reigning only weeks before meeting the sword. Meanwhile, the economy faltered. Inflation soared, coins were debased, trade routes were threatened. To pay for the military and luxury, taxes crushed the poor, while elites grew ever richer. The heart of Rome was rotting. Barbarian tribes pressed the borders, Goths, Franks, Sarmatians. Plagues swept through the cities. Crops failed. Faith faltered. Rome had conquered the world, but now it couldn't govern itself. It had become a bloated machine, run by fear, fueled by greed, and held together by force. And in that decay, something new was stirring. A shift, a whisper of God, an empire reborn. But before rebirth, there would be one final descent. Rome was no longer one city. It was a name, a memory, a machine stretched across 3 continents, cracking under its own weight. By the late 3rd century CE, it was clear one emperor could no longer rule at all. So in 285 CE, Emperor Diocletian made a bold decision. He divided the empire. The west would be ruled from Milan and Ravenna, the east from Nicomedia, and later from a new capital, Constantinople. What followed was a brief return to order, but the unity was gone. In the west, emperors came and went like shadows. They were puppets manipulated by generals, warlords, and court intrigue. Barbarian pressure grew stronger. The Visigoths sacked Rome itself in 410 CE, the first time in 800 years the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign enemy. To the Romans, it felt like the end of the world, but it was only the beginning. Across the frontiers, the empire lost province after province. Britain was abandoned. Gaul fell to the Franks. Spain, Africa, and Italy lost to Vandals, Goths, and Huns. The Western Roman Empire, once a titan, was now reduced to a name. In 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a child, was deposed by the Germanic general Odoacer. No grand battle, no burning capital, just a quiet collapse. The Senate sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople. Rome, in the west, was no more, but the east lived on. Byzantium, as we now call it, continued for nearly 1,000 years more, with emperors, armies, cathedrals, and culture. They called themselves Romans, and in name they were. Rome never truly died. It became an idea, passed to the church, to the east, to future kings and empires. Every conqueror who came after, Charlemagne, the czars, even Mussolini, claimed to restore it. Because Rome wasn't just an empire, it was immortality. Its roads still shape Europe. Its laws echo in modern courts. Its stories fill libraries. Its fall wasn't the end. It was a mirror, showing what happens when power outgrows purpose, when ambition overtakes virtue, and when even the greatest among us forget what built them. Rome rose from myth, conquered the known world, and collapsed under its own greatness. And even in ruins, it still shapes our world, because in the end, Rome never left. It simply waits to be reborn.